Now we're going to change gears a little and focus on what the people side of transformation means and building a culture of resilience in your business. Here to join me to talk about that, I'm delighted to welcome Claudia Nemat, Board Member for Technology and Innovation at Deutsche Telekom. Claudia, welcome.
Hi Nick, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, and I hope all is well with you in Bonn.
Absolutely, absolutely. I can't complain.
Very good. Now, it's been a challenging few months, and I know that from some of the conversations we've had in the past that culture is high on your agenda when it comes to transformation and the importance of people. But perhaps I should start by asking you, what have you learned in the last few months in terms of the COVID situation about the impact that has on culture and perhaps a new lens on your people?
Actually, we learned that resilience is key. And we were actually quite lucky in spite of the fact that we had a massive volume increase. For example, Netflix parties went up by 3,000%, video conferences by 300%. Our networks and our IT was actually stable and safe. And I must say that was due to past investments into resilience, both into technology innovation, but also in the way we work and in culture. Maybe on the technology side, an important topic was the digitization of the network, the IP transformation, because that had reduced the number of faults, that has created a plug-and-play experience. It was the prerequisite for broadband rollout, but equally important, and I would say maybe even more important, was the investments we did in the way we work. And to make that very practical, like most telcos, we are, for instance, measuring the traffic 24 times 7 hours a week. And because we established flexible working, our experts were able in real time to detect traffic anomalies. And when that happened, they could immediately redirect the traffic. And they were also able to upgrade the networks pretty quickly. Or the same in the IT. I mean, like many of us, we had to bring in Germany, it was 17,000 call center agents to home office in just a couple of days. And a couple of years ago, that would not have been possible because it requires a can-do attitude. It requires trust between business and IT. And it also requires somehow the ability to reprogram all these call routes. So I would say trust, can do, and investment into working methods was actually very important to get that done. So I would say resilience and investments in times which are good are important. And maybe on a more general term, I would say, if you think that when a crisis arrives and you are standing in front of the cliff, at the edge of the cliff, you can jump down and somehow you finally get wings. That's not going to happen. Yeah. So my biggest lesson learned is investments into resilience in culture and the way we work should ideally have happened before the crisis. Maybe a last comment, what we learned, like everyone as well. Sometimes a crisis can, of course, be an accelerator of change. Yeah. Things which we thought they would never have been possible, like working from home, suddenly became possible. So the art of the impossible was also the second lessons learned we had in that crisis.
That's great, Claudia, and I think I've spoken to many executives across the industry who are seeing the same, in fact, some surprising side effects of this situation where productivity actually goes up with people working from home and employees are more engaged. Do you think that's a short-term effect, or is that sustainable in the long term? What's the long-term picture for your ways of working?
So first of all, we indeed realized that in certain functions, productivity went up, customer experience also. For example, customer experience went up with our call center agents, and productivity in the IT units were higher than before. Now, is that sustainable? I believe we need to find a more hybrid way of working, because there are certain tasks which for sure you can do from remote or from anywhere. And for some tasks, we also need to convene and come together. I believe we human beings are social animals, and therefore these informal conversations, these excitement you get from learning from different areas or from talking to each other out of a specific context is important as well. So therefore our conclusion is while we strongly believe that more can be done remote, and that we can also get rid of unnecessary business travel, these one-day trips. On the one hand. On the other hand, we need to create spaces where human beings can actually convene and exchange each other.
Now, many operators have found that, as you've commented, this has been a moment where we can really do away with some of the old ways of working, some of the bureaucracy, decisions get made faster, people can perhaps air more radical thoughts than they might do normally. Are you seeing the team, I know it sounds an odd thing to say, but have they actually been energized by the freedom that this creates?
Yes, at the very beginning, I saw that the need to act and find solutions in that crisis inspired people. For example, and I know that many of my colleagues in other telcos have experienced that as well. I think in our industry, we realized that we are doing something which is of utmost importance for human beings. Yeah, without us as telcos, human beings would have been unable to be connected to the people who are important to them, or human beings would have been unable to do work. Digital education would not have happened. So finally, people realized how important an excellent connection really is. And I think that purpose and the appreciation we achieved and received by other human beings was something that was really energizing. Yeah, because people love to do things which they find purposeful. And I was realizing that that helped our industry and Deutsche Telekom quite a bit. Yeah, so on the other hand, what you also see after a couple of months and longer periods in remote work, that many people get the desire to get together again. Yeah, so somehow we felt that we need to find a bridge between these two worlds and allow getting together, of course, always respecting the hygiene rules which COVID actually imposes on us.
Now, let's talk about that point of innovation that you've seen in the last few months and the ways in which that's happened, and think a little bit longer term. Innovation is going to be critical to our future. It's a key part of your role in Deutsche Telekom to lead that growth, and Deutsche Telekom has been one of the operators, I think, that's set a very clear path forward. But how do you see the link between the ways of working, culture in the business, and even topics like diversity in terms of driving forward that innovation?
Very strongly, I believe innovation is impossible without having the innovation culture, because innovation is nothing about being a department for innovation. Yeah, that's not actually working. So therefore, I think a number of things. First of all, what works quite well in Deutsche Telekom, even pre-COVID, was the idea of scaling once you tried small. So try small, and if it works, scale fast, and if it doesn't work, forget about it. Yeah, so that has been a success factor, but very often it took us too long to actually kill projects that didn't work. Yeah, and at the same time, we failed in scaling. To give you one practical example, the IP transformation I talked about was the big decade project for Deutsche Telekom in the last decade. And I started it 9 years ago with smaller countries, with Croatia, Slovakia. And at the very beginning, everybody was saying, oh my God, that country is so small, that's maybe just the size of Berlin. It's not going to work. But the more and more you could prove that it works, because you have airlines, you have power plants, complex B2B customers also there, the more people finally realized that we are going to do that in the big countries like Germany as well. And we are now finishing it just right now. So that mechanism. We also have a big skill transformation program in Deutsche Telekom, where we actually, in the board area technology innovation, will actually reskill and upskill at least 30% of our human beings. But also here at the very beginning, people said, oh, no, my God, yeah, no way. Yeah, so it's absolutely impossible to re-educate people who are above 40 years or so. And also here, we started small. We actually started to retrain and reskill 100 people with just one specific skill set. Last year we did 1,000, and now in this year and next year we have thousands of human beings who go through these skill academies and go into their individual learning paths. So from my point of view, starting small and then scaling is a good recipe. Another important point on cultural transformation is for us as leader to stop thinking that you as a manager or leader are really almighty, that you know everything better than the people you are working with. I think that is not the idea of modern leadership. So the role of the leader is not to decide and drive and to do everything by yourself, but rather creating an environment in which human beings are actually passionate about doing what they are supposed to do. And that's difficult. It's also difficult for myself as a leader who was educated in the 90s. So I had to unlearn these mechanisms and allow the creation of a culture which is actually, I would call it, more servant, more enabling, more making sure that human beings can actually work according to their needs and to what is required from the company. So that's a big step, that servant leadership.
Now, servant leadership and these terms, different ways of working, get banded around, but it sounds like you're seeing personally the impact in how you lead, but also you're really seeing the results in terms of the improvement in innovation in the business. And are you seeing that in a more engaged workforce? You talked earlier about the purpose, and that's a motivating factor, but would you say it's leading to innovation coming from within, or are you seeking that innovation from outside DT?
Both. I believe that you always need to make sure when you talk about innovation that you are totally open to the ecosystem. So I see a huge aspect of innovation coming from working with startups, with smaller companies around the world, from working with our partners in the technology landscape, from having strong collaboration with other telcos. For example, for a long period of time, we've had a strong collaboration with Orange. The smart speaker we developed was something we, from the very beginning, co-developed with Orange in France. And by the way, the design was done by a design school in Milano. So I would call it a fantastic French, German, Italian co-investment and co-innovation. So I strongly believe in getting inspiration from outside. Another example is the CTO in my team comes from South Korea, from SK Telecom. And we actually took a number of 5G investments that did work incredibly well in the market in South Korea, and we are now importing that with pride to Germany. So I strongly believe in external orientation and in co-creation and in collaboration with other partners around the world, on the one hand. On the other hand, I think it's also important to work very heavily on the culture from within. And start small and then scale in case of success is an important parameter. Making sure that you enable people rather than apply a command and control style is another important aspect. A third aspect I would emphasize is the beauty of rotation, which we did in our IT area, where we actually, on a middle management level, rotated everyone. So to make sure that people are encouraged to take a different perspective than the perspective they actually had. And then I would say, you asked about diversity. Diversity is mission critical, but in my point of view, diversity is about many dimensions. It's about experience background, it's about age, it's about international background, it's about gender, it's about even style. I personally believe that you always should make sure that you have a sufficient balance between more extrovert people and then the deep introvert thinkers. Yeah, so I believe nowadays, unless you have a real diverse workforce and leadership team, you will not be able to capture the different aspects required to really understand what you want to innovate and what you want to do.
Now, that diversity topic is one that's going to come up throughout our human factor track at this series, and it's perhaps an unusual topic for the technology side of a business to be so focused on the people, but I couldn't agree with you more on the diversity point, and it's that diversity of thought, as you said. It's not just what you can see in terms of diversity, it's the background and experience and just that creative tension you can create. To what extent within DT has the technology function been leading that kind of change, that change in ways of working? Are you educating your peers on the commercial side, or is it a joint effort?
I would say it's a joint effort, even though I would see us as pioneers. In many dimensions, I think the technology area was probably the first area where we had incredible diversity in terms of experience, background, in terms of internationality. Maybe less so in terms of gender. By the way, I also still struggling with getting enough females here on board in the technology arena. But for example, to make that very practical, as I said, the CTO comes from South Korea. The person who runs product innovation has a French, US, Morocco-based passport. The HR lady in my team is originally from South Africa. Then, of course, we have a few Germans. Yeah, from a background, we have a philosopher, engineers, software experts. I myself, I'm a physicist. We have people who've been in Deutsche Telekom for a longer period of time and people who are actually new to the team. So that was probably a very strong embracement of diversity. But beyond diversity, also when I look at our IT arena, we were actually realizing that the historic way of looking at IT as a cost item primarily and as something which was heavily managed in a waterfall manner, we started a major skill and cultural transformation program in that arena. And that was, so to say, about agility, it was about changing the architecture, but it was also the area where we really could see that we need far more software engineers, far more AI specialists, far more data specialists, and fewer people who are project managers or who run administrative functions. So when we realized the problem, we were actually also realizing that we have to invest in that skill transformation I was talking about, and that we need to go away from the traditional line organizations and create a skill-based organization, which actually gives people the perspective how they can develop in their respective capabilities, but where we also make sure that people get staffed to innovation projects, process projects, where we actually require those capabilities. By the way, the skill-based organization in the technology and IT arena was also a necessary precondition for doing what I said before. Stop those projects which are not creating the results you expect early on, while flexibly refocusing people on the projects which are actually pretty relevant. Historically, when we had the line organizations, people always felt that they need to stick to their old projects, that they need to stick to their platforms, that they need to stick to a certain vendor, because they were concerned that when we stop that, that stops their career within Deutsche Telekom. But if you create a skill-based organization and then allocate people flexibly to innovation projects, then that reason to stick to the past goes away. Yeah. And we have seen that as a huge, huge driver for the acceptance of the new way of working, actually.
Now, our time is almost up, Claudia, but I have just one last question for you. You were talking about a subject equally close to my heart earlier of collaboration. And that, of course, is the whole reason the TM Forum exists and why we're running this series for the next 6 weeks. You have a global audience here today. What would your advice be to that audience in terms of the importance of collaboration and how to perhaps look at this industry in a different light through what we've learned in the last few months?
So I would say collaboration is key. For that industry, we are all moving towards software companies with human experience, customer experience in the center of what we are doing. And I think the big chance for that industry is to view ourselves as an incredibly purposeful industry for the new normal, as an industry which puts the human being into the center of all what we are doing, and that we humbly recognize that technology is not a purpose in itself, but a great enabler for making the lives of human beings better. The customers we serve, the partners we are working with, and the human beings in the countries we are operating in. So that human-centered technology definition, from my point of view, is something which has become even more relevant through the crisis, and that is incredibly linked to the idea of collaboration. By the way, I would also make the plea for more collaboration in the industry. I do believe that the time of the cowboys, where everyone was going against each other and actually trying to have the biggest ego on earth on this planet, is gone. So I believe we have hopefully discovered that, so that, and if we do, that would be a perfect avenue for our industry. I would call that fruitful collaboration and co-opetition, putting the human beings we humbly serve in the center of all what we are doing. That would be my hope and my plea. And I would also say, well, I'm very open to doing further collaborations. As I mentioned, we are very open to collaborate with telcos and tech vendors here in that industry.
Energizing words. Claudia Nemat, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nick. Bye-bye.